The ongoing situation in Ottawa and in the nation's capital is developing, and more developments continue to come as the days progress. The Emergencies Act was invoked by the government, and joining me now to discuss that and more is the Emergency Preparedness Minister, as well as the former Toronto Police Chief, Bill Blair. Minister Blair, thanks for joining me. I want to start out with the Emergencies Act that was invoked on February 11th. Prime Minister Trudeau and President Biden spoke. How much did, I guess, President Biden speaking with Prime Minister Trudeau, how much did that play a role in, the federal government wanting to invoke the Emergencies Act? And was President Biden supportive of the move? Obviously, I'm sure you weren't, speaking with him directly, but in terms of just, your government.
Actually, I've been working really closely with the Prime Minister right from the very beginning of the demonstrations and protests that have taken place in Ottawa. And Wyatt, I want to assure you and all your listeners that the Prime Minister is the leader of our country. We're a sovereign country, and he is in charge of the decisions that we make on how to protect Canada and Canadian interests. Certainly, there's been a number of important discussions going on between the Prime Minister and the President, including, for example, we've been talking a lot about the situation in Ukraine, and we're really concerned about what is taking place there. But we also know that the impact of the protests that were taking place in Canada, particularly at our points of entry and our borders, like down in Windsor, has affected international trade and the movement of essential goods between both countries. And so there was some discussion about steps that the Americans could take and assurances the Prime Minister was able to provide the President on the work that we are doing in order to maintain the integrity and the security of our borders and to reopen them to the supply of essential goods. And as you've probably seen through the course of the past weekend and this week, some important steps have been taken. That Ambassador Bridge is now open so that goods and services and supplies can move back and forth, and that our factories can get back to work and people can get back to work in our country.
When we look at the Emergencies Act, obviously, for people that haven't necessarily went over what it means, what power does the police force have in terms of, demonstrators who are, refusing to leave on their own?
Yeah, and why it's a really important question, and thank you for it. First of all, the highest law in our country, the most important law in our country, is the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And the Charter of Rights and Freedoms gives Canadians the right to lawful, peaceful protest, freedom of opinion, freedom of expression, and freedom of assembly. But there are reasonable limits on those rights. And when you exercise your freedom to protest, for example, it has to be lawful, it has to be peaceful, and it can't interfere with the rights and freedoms of everyone else. And so over the past 2 weeks, we've seen, unfortunately, some really unfortunate criminal activity that was obviously intended to disrupt the lives and hurt the people of Ottawa. And then when we saw the blockades at our borders, that was a very concerning, targeted attack on Canadian interest and Canadian infrastructure, which can't be allowed to persist. And so our responsibility is to use all of the tools that are available to us. And that includes municipal bylaws, parking tickets, for example, provincial offenses, which for example, the province regulates the highway, and even our criminal laws. And we've seen some criminal mischief charges have been laid in the circumstances of these protests. And just on Monday, we saw a situation where in Alberta, there were some people that were heavily armed with dangerous firearms, and that they were conspiring and working together to harm the police who were trying to keep the peace of the protest. And so the criminal laws have been used as well. But as we went through all of the things that our current laws could do, it became obvious that there were gaps. And so we worked with the province of Ontario, for example. They declared an emergency last Thursday, and on Friday implemented a number of really important regulations that were applicable to the province of Ontario. But more needed to be done. And so we worked over the course of the weekend. And on Monday, the Prime Minister announced that we were going to be introducing the Emergency Act regulations. And I'll tell you sort of what they include. There's basically 6 areas that we're now dealing with. And part of, one of the ways in which you control people's behavior and make sure that, they're, especially if they're harming others, is we follow the money. And so part of the new regulations that we brought in allow our federal agencies, the police and our finance department, to follow the money. And one of the things we've discovered is so much of the money that's supporting this criminal activity in Canada is coming from outside of Canada, from other countries. It also enables us to bring in real consequences, to freeze the assets of people who are involved in some of this serious criminal activity. There's some tools there that are going to be very important for the police to be able to clear sensitive, important areas like our ports of entry, so that people can't block goods and services and critical infrastructure at our borders. There's some new tools that's going to enable the police to be more efficient in doing their job. But I want to assure you that everything we're doing is going to be charter compliant. It's respecting people's rights and freedoms. It's all subject to parliamentary oversight, which is really important because Canadians want law enforcement to be publicly accountable to them for the way in which they use these tools. It's proportional, it's measured, it's careful. And I will tell you, I was very much involved with the Prime Minister and with our Attorney General, the Public Safety Minister, the Transport Minister, and others in bringing forward these regulations. And I want to tell you, we did it with great regret. We wish that this had not been necessary, but the circumstances frankly left us no choice. We have to protect Canada. We have to protect Canadian interests. We have to protect all of our citizens. And that's why we've done what we've done.
Obviously, the fear with blockading the border is it'll have an impact on the goods that we import and export in and out of Canada. So obviously that's very important. So how can you make sure that, these blockades don't continue? Obviously, again, the Emergencies Act is one way to do that, but is that all there is to it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That one of the big impacts was blockading the border. For example, when they closed the Ambassador Bridge down at Windsor, Ontario, our in Ontario, there's a number of auto plants, where they manufacture cars, but they rely on parts that come into the country from the United States, and some of the things we manufacture go down to complete the manufacturing process in the United States. When these criminal blockaders, blocked our ports, those auto plants all closed. Thousands of Canadian workers were sent home. They couldn't do their jobs. That affects our economy. It affects the livelihoods of those people. It's just unfair. And the other thing they were blocking, every day trucks come in with produce that go into our grocery stores, the fruits and vegetables that we need every day, pharmaceuticals and other essential goods were blocked at the port. And so we had no choice but to reopen that. It is, I think a lesson that we've learned. We are going to have to do more to protect critical infrastructure like our points of entry and our supply chains, because unfortunately, some people have discovered that this is a way to hurt the country. And we have to make sure that they don't have that ability, but I'll tell you how well it works. Just earlier today, we cleared off the blockades at Windsor a few days ago. Another group of truckers were heading down to Windsor in order to see if they could blockade the bridge again. And using the new tools that we've provided, the police stopped them and turned them around, and they kept that bridge open. So, with the right tools and police officers who are going to use them responsibly, we can protect our citizens.
One final question, Minister. In terms of, your opposition colleagues in the House of Commons, particularly the Conservatives, they say that they don't support the invoking of the Emergencies Act. Their message today, Candice Bergen, their interim leader, said that obviously she doesn't support, the people who are, blocking Wellington Street directly, but there does seem to be a couple of, people within the Conservative Party who do still, support the protest happening in Ottawa. What's your message to some of your opposition colleagues in the House of Commons today?
I think it's really unfortunate, Wyatt, that at the very beginning of these protests, some politicians thought that they could benefit personally from these protests to try to embarrass the government. And Ms. Bergen said that she wanted to make sure that the protesters were supported so that they could make it Prime Minister Trudeau's problem. The unfortunate thing of that might have been good for them, but it wasn't good for the people of Ottawa, and it certainly wasn't good for Canada. And when the blockades began at our points of entry, I think initially they were happy. Some of the Conservatives, and I want to be really clear, many people in the House of Commons from all parties are patriots, and they love and work hard to support our country. And unfortunately, there's a few who just look for their own advantage for political purposes. And so I don't want to brand all the Conservatives with this. Unfortunately, a few of them, a relatively small number, thought that they could exploit this very difficult situation to their own benefit. But I think that even they have finally come to realize that these blockades were hurting Canada and hurting Canadians, and the behavior is clearly criminal. And no one wants to be seen to be supporting criminal activity. So I'm hopeful that, notwithstanding the Conservatives are not supporting the imposition of these measures, I think that, frankly, I care more about what Canadians think than I do than the opposition members. And I think the overwhelming majority of Canadians want us to maintain the integrity and the security of our borders. They want us to do what's necessary to support and serve Canadians and protect Canadian interests. And they do not support a protest whose aim was to overthrow the government. They said they wanted to come in. We just had an election. Canadians chose their government. And yet these guys all showed up in Ottawa in their trucks, and their plan was to overthrow the government, and they wanted to take over themselves. That's not how it works in Canada. And I think we all agree that we have to defend our democracy, defend our rule of law, and defend our streets. And that's what we're all doing.
Okay, that is Bill Blair, Minister of Emergency Preparedness. Minister Blair, thanks so much for giving me some of your time today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, Wyatt. Thank you very much.